cover something up based on their reaction to questions, and it can help with an investigation.
Absolutely. And so polygraph is a tool. Polygraph is a tool within the arsenal of things that we have, that we use in investigations. But beyond investigations, the most popular use of polygraph in criminal justice and law enforcement is actually in the hiring process, which is where a lot of us might have some experience with polygraph as we move through the criminal justice system and try to get hired. And so a little bit about it. Polygraph historically has been around for about 100 years. It's undergone many changes, as you can imagine, a lot of technology. A lot of us are used to seeing the old polygraph instruments that had the ink and it would go up and down on a piece of paper. Those instruments are basically obsolete now, as we've now use polygraph instruments that are run through a computer. So that's one advance we've had. And polygraphs are often, people would refer to them as lie detectors, which is really not an accurate term to describe the polygraph, because the polygraph doesn't detect lies. What the polygraph does detect are changes in your physiology based on the questions that are asked. Now, polygraphs are, like most scientific instruments, are never 100% accurate, and they're subject on how effective they are based on what the experience, training, and knowledge of the examiner can be sometimes. What we see on TV with the polygraphs that are done are often not a very accurate depiction of what a true polygraph is. About 99% of the polygraphs I run are what we call pre-employment, people that are looking to get hired. A very small percentage of the polygraphs we do are criminal polygraphs. So starting out, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what the polygraph consists of. And so, as I said, we're now to the electronic instruments, which are run through a computer. And when you typically see somebody hooked up to a polygraph, they're going to have two straps around their chest, one high and one low. We refer to those as pneumograph tubes. And all those two things do is they just measure changes in breathing. And we use two because some people breathe from their chest and some people breathe from their belly. So rather than trying to guessing where somebody breathes from, we monitor both. The other thing that you will see are two attachments that go on two fingers. And those, we call them GSR, and they're galvanic skin response. So basically, that part of the polygraph is measuring changes in your sweat output. The next thing that you'll see are people will have like a blood pressure cuff on, like you would use at the doctor's office. And we use those in many different areas to monitor blood pressure. We can put them on the arm, we can put them on the forearm, you can actually even put them on the legs. And what that does is we put a little pressure in there, and all we're doing is we're measuring changes in your heart rate and your pulse rate. Now, those are the physiological measurements of a polygraph. And the last thing is will be a pad typically that you sit on in the chair, and that's a movement sensor. And so that's only there to try to detect people who are moving. When you take a polygraph, we instruct you to be still. Some people try to beat the polygraph by moving around, which oftentimes works against them. So that's the setup of the polygraph, and each of the tubes coming off of those particular pieces of equipment are run into a box that's then hooked into a computer, and we measure the screen as lines go across. And so the polygraph is based on something called your, does anybody know what it's based on? Anybody want to take a guess? Shakira, take a guess. What do you think the polygraph's based on, Shakira?
I would say like heartbeat, and then you say your heartbeat and your muscles.
Yeah, a lot of it is your cardiac response, but the whole polygraph itself is based on your autonomic nervous system. So your autonomic nervous system kind of sounds like automatic, and your autonomic nervous system is the kind of the center that keeps you alive. It controls your heart rate, it controls breathing, and it controls all those things. And so after years of study, what we found out is that people, when they're deceptive, they have changes in their physiology. When we lie, our body physically reacts to that lie because we know we're doing something that typically is not normal. Control involuntary actions. I see somebody made a chat. So would you like to give me a little bit more explanation of what you meant by that?
So I meant, since it's based on the autonomic nervous system, it's basically controlling, not control the impulses. Like, oh, sweating too much is not something you can control. So changes to that shows, yeah, there's something wrong.
That is an outstanding point and a great observation. And that's what really the polygraph is based on. It's based on the fact that our bodies react to certain things automatically. And so what the polygraph is kind of based on with the autonomic nervous system is really fight or flight syndrome. So has everybody heard of fight or flight system? Lamai, you tell me about fight or flight system. What is it? Did I pronounce your name? How do you say it?
It's pronounced Olamide.
Almade.
Olamide.
Or O. How's O? How's that? You call me C, I call you O.
Okay.
Okay, so tell me what fight or flight system is. Fight or flight.
So, in regular terms, it's basically when your body goes into, like, when you have a rush of adrenaline, in a way you experience a situation and you're like, you either run away from it or like you just gain so much momentum that you actually face it. It's the way it's defined, flight or fight. So you either choose one or both.
Yeah, you get a virtual fist bump because that was an outstanding definition, and that's exactly what fight or flight system, fight or flight is. You know, if we're walking down a path in the woods, right, and then we're moseying down, life's good, we're happy, and all of a sudden a bear appears. Well, as soon as our eyes see bear, it sends a message to our brain that says, hey, there's a bear ahead and they're pretty dangerous. We might want to figure out what we're going to do here. And then we have a choice to make. And a bear is not always the best example because I'm not quite sure. You can't outrun them. You can't climb a tree. I don't know what you do. But anyways, we have to do something. And so fight or flight, and it doesn't matter which one we choose. What happens in fight or flight is our heart rate goes up, our breathing changes, right? And we sweat. And the reason we sweat is because our heart's working faster and our breathing is more labored, our body temperature goes up. And so how do we cool our body temperature down? We start to sweat. And so it doesn't matter when the bear appears, if you choose to fight the bear or you choose to run from the bear, our body reacts in the same way. And so whenever we're faced with a threat, fight or flight kicks in. Doesn't always have to be a bear in the woods. Let's say you're driving down the road and all of a sudden we're going a little bit fast, right? Christina, can you hear me, Christina?
I can.
Christina, so you're flying down the road, you're going 100 miles an hour in a 55. This is a make-believe because Christina would never go that fast, would you, Christina?
Never.
Christina, you've never broken a speeding law in your entire life, have you?
Of course not.
No, that's what I like to hear, Christina. So Christina's going 100 miles an hour down the interstate, trying not to be late, and she turns the corner and there's a trooper right in the middle in the median. When you see that trooper, Christina, what's the first thing that you feel?
Fear.
Fear. Why?
because I know I was doing something wrong.
Exactly. And so in that situation, what Christina is feeling is fight or flight syndrome kicking in, because just like she said, she knows she's doing something she shouldn't. So automatically fight or flight kicks in, and now she knows she's probably going to get in trouble. So her body's ramped up, her heartbeat's beating, her breathing changes. She maybe start to sweat a little bit. And then Christina, you pass the police officer and he pulls out and he pulls in behind you. Now, what are you feeling? You still with me, Christina?
Oh, I am sorry. He pulled up. Well, I'm still scared.
Yeah, he pulled out of the median and he's right in your back, but he hadn't turned his lights on yet.
I'm still pretty scared.
Still pretty scared because once again, fight or flight kicks in. Yeah, nervous. And then Christina, at the last second, the police officer gets in the left lane and passes you by. Now, what do you feel?
Relief.
Exactly. So I've just taken you through the entire fight or flight syndrome. So what happens is you're faced with a threat. You react, your body reacts to that threat with fight or flight, meaning your heart rate goes up, your breathing changes, you start to sweat. And then when that danger passes, there's this feeling of relief. And what that is your body coming back to what we call homeostasis or normalcy. And so your heart rate stops to drop down, your breathing changes, you stop sweating, because we can't stay at that heightened sense of awareness all the time. We would be drained. So as we come back down, that's why we have questions and we wait 25 seconds between each question to allow that cycle of fight or flight to ramp up or not, and then to return to normalcy. So I know, Janae, somebody had a question that popped up, but I didn't quite see it.
Yes, so the question is, and it's a good one, what would you tell someone if it was their first time taking a polygraph?
Okay, so we get this all the time. So I'll have people that are through the hiring process, first job, and they're walking in the door for their first polygraph. And so what they're feeling are nerves and fright, and they don't know what to experience. They don't know what's going to happen. And all those things are 100% normal. So Polygraph School for me was 3 months, 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. And during that time, I took a polygraph for most of that every day as we learned how to do it. And it didn't matter whether it was the first time I took one or the last day before graduation. The feelings of nervousness and a little bit of apprehension were always there. And that's normal. You're going to feel that. But what I want you to understand is, now that I've kind of explained how the polygraph works, let's talk about what to expect on your first pre-employment polygraph. But before I do, does anybody have any questions about why the polygraph works? Fight or flight syndrome, ramping up, changes in physiology, then coming back down. And so before I move on to what the process is, because that is a great question, I just wanted to finish out what the science is. And that is, so when somebody is deceptive, and it's not always deception, sometimes it can be that this question has hit something that they feel very strongly about, then what you see is a change in their physiology. And so what we are taught during polygraph school is what normal signs, lines that these polygraphs show, what normalcy looks like, and then what changes when you ask somebody a question. And so it's that change in physiology, it's the kicking in of fight or flight that makes a reaction. And that's what we center on, reactions. And when we do these charts, and this is a good time, I guess, to switch into what that day of going in and taking a polygraph is going to be. But before I do that, did anybody have any questions on the science behind the polygraph? And I know somebody asked about questions, and I'm definitely going to get to that one.
So there's 2 questions.
Okay.
Do they change the questions each time? And then if someone has anxiety disorder, does that change how the polygraph test works?
And the answer to the first question is yes. The questions change based on an interview we do with the person, which I'll go more into in a minute. So yes, there is definitely a change in the questions because we're trying to find ones that connect with that person. And the question about anxiety disorder is no. Now, what we do have to sometimes watch is you'll be asked a medical question is, are you currently on any medications which could affect the results of the polygraph? Obviously, when we're looking at physiology, any medications that could affect that physiology could have an effect on the polygraph. But by and large, it can be anxiety ridden for anybody. And so it's kind of the role of the examiner to bring that anxiety level down. I tell people all the time, there's only one thing you have to do to pass a polygraph test. What do you think that is? Anybody?
Be honest.
That's it. Great answer. The only thing you have to do is be honest. And so I tell people, you know, there's different kinds of deceptions in the world. There's little lies. Somebody give me an example of a little lie.
Like a fib?
Yeah.
Like a whitetail?
Anything you want to say. Make one up for me.
I can't even think of one off the bat.
You know what people always say when I say that? Give me an example of a little lie. You know what they tell me?
I'm still out the store. There's one.
Most people say, hey, I like your shirt. And I'm like, wow. So they're lying to me when they say that. But, and then so we have little lies and then there's big lies. So Melissa, give me an example of a big lie.
Maybe in a workplace, you might lie about the corruption you may cause. So
yeah,
something
exactly.
big and serious, you may have been like, no, I didn't do that. And then come to find out that you did.
Yeah, great. That's a wonderful example. And then I tell people there's a third category, which is called lies of omission. Has anybody ever heard of a lie of omission?
I believe so.
Okay. So a lie of omission, I'll give you an example. So let me go through this list. Ronald, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Ronald, do you mind answering a question for me?
Go ahead.
So Ronald, growing up, did you ever have curfews?
Yeah, I had curfews like when I was very young.
Okay.
And still as a teenager.
Okay. So typically when you're younger, teenagers, and you go out to a friend's house, your parents are going to say, hey, where are you going to be and what time you're going to be home?
Right.
Right. And so a lie of omission would be, let's say you tell your mom or dad, you say, hey, I'm going to my friend John's house.
Mm-hmm.
And your parents say, hey, great, Ronald. I want you to be home by midnight and I want you to come directly home from your friend's house. And you say, hey,
Right.
no problem. And then you're over at John's house and then you hear from your friend Ben. He says, hey, look, everybody's hanging out at McDonald's. You guys come over here. So your friend John convinces you to go. You go to McDonald's and they say, hey, Rob's having a party. So you all go to Rob's house. And you hang out at Rob's house. And then it gets time to curfew. You run home. You walk through the door. You make it on time. And your mom's standing there and she said, did you come directly home from your friend's house? Now, in your mind, you're thinking, ooh, John's my friend, but you know what? Rob's my friend too. So you can say, yeah, I did come directly home. Did you just tell a lie to your mom?
Yeah.
What?
Because you weren't completely honest.
What do you mean? I mean, I thought you were being because Rob's your friend.
Well, yeah, but you went to her perspective. Like if my mom was asking, her perspective was one friend. Not
Okay.
Not the other three friends.
So mom was talking, did you come directly home from John's house, not
Right.
Rob's house? Exactly. So in your mind, you told a lie. So see, when you take a polygraph, it's not what I think is a lie. It's what you, as the one taking the polygraph, view as a deception. So lies of omission. So we have big ones, we have little ones, and we have lies of omission. Now the instrument doesn't tell me, hey, Craig, don't worry about that one. That was just a little lie, no big deal. Your body reacts to these deceptions the same, whether it's a big one, a little one, or a live omission. There's no degree there. Your body reacts to all of them the same way. And so that's kind of the science behind it. So it's really based off your autonomic nervous system. And then within there, it's really based on your fight or flight syndrome. And that's the basis, the scientific basis for the polygraph. And it just says, and when we're faced with this fight or flight syndrome, that we have a physical reaction, our physiology changes. And so when I say physiology, I'm saying a change in your heart rate, or a change in your breathing. All right, so that's what everything is based off of. And so we see these changes on the screen in front of us. So let's talk a little bit now. Somebody asked a question about anxiety on a polygraph. And I tell people, everybody is nervous during a polygraph, right? Everybody. Martha, have you ever had a polygraph? Can you hear me, Martha? I can kind of see you, but I think you're muted. I don't know. Can you hear me? I don't know if Martha. Oh, there you are.
Okay. I have never had a polygraph.
Okay. So Martha, if you were going to take a polygraph and you walked into the room with me, you'd probably be a little nervous. Is that fair to say?
Right. Yes.
And you'd probably be wondering, hey, is my nervousness going to affect my ability to pass this exam?
No, I probably wouldn't, because I'd figure that I'm no more nervous than anybody else.
I know, but Martha, for the purposes of my storytelling, you're supposed to say yeah, and
Okay,
you're just
I'll say
kind of
yeah.
you're real
I'll
okay.
say- Okay, I'll
So
say
you would
yeah.
you'd be nervous that your nervousness would affect the exam, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that way to go. Thank you for helping me out on that, Martha. I appreciate it.
So I'm going to appear to be a liar.
No, I don't want. Yeah, I don't want you to be afraid of that, but that's what you're scared of.
Yep.
So here's what I tell people. Here's why nervousness doesn't affect the polygraph. And I'm going to tell you a story so that you understand why it doesn't. So for a minute, Martha, we're going to pretend that you live in a cabin out in the middle of the woods with nobody around. Does that sound fun?
Yeah, I'm worried about that bear.
I got rid of them all before you moved in, so no
thank
concerns
you.
there.
Thank
So
you.
out in front of your cabin is this 30-acre lake, right? And
Mhm.
this lake is like 30 feet deep. Okay, Martha?
Okay.
So
Doing good.
day one, you walk out of your front door with your coffee and there's no wind whatsoever. So what does the surface of that lake look like?
It looks smooth.
Like glass, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And 30 feet under, the water down below there is also undisturbed, right? It's just
Okay.
there.
Mm-hmm.
So day two, you walk out and there's a little breeze. What does the surface of that lake look like?
Ripply.
But if we look 30 feet under, the water way down there is not affected by what's going on way up here, is it?
I guess not.
No. Yeah. For the purposes of my story. Yeah. Good answer. Now, day three, you walk out and it's windy, really windy. What does the surface of that lake look like?
It looks like it has waves, maybe white caps.
Yeah, absolutely. Whitecaps. But 30 feet under, that water is, again, not affected by what's going on. And so that's kind of nerves in a polygraph. And so while you're nervous on the surface, the things that I'm looking at with the instrument are 30 feet deep and not affected by that nervousness. Now, if you told me a lie, what would if you picked up a rock out in front of your cabin and you threw that rock into the water, what would happen when it hits the surface?
There'd be a big splash.
Yeah. And then as that water goes all the way down to the bottom, doesn't it disturb the water all the way down?
I guess so.
Thank you again for playing along with me. I appreciate that. And you're right. So the rock is representative of a lie. It affects it all the way down till you get to the bottom, where nervousness only resides up here on the surface. And Martha, thank you for being a very willing and coachable, if not hesitant, volunteer. So
That was so nice.
That was
to get rid of
great.
the
That
bear.
was great, Martha. That was so great. Craig, we have a couple questions. We have lots of questions that.
we do. Okay, let's start.
Yes. there was a question after the question about anxiety disorder. I'm just going to run through the questions so that we know what we're looking at, so you can decide how you want to do it. There's a question about the test taken for the police officers versus the military test. And then there's a question about, are there like random questions that are targeted just at the individual? And then there's actually a question about process, about the standards that are admissible in court versus the reason why the polygraph is used in the first place. So I think it goes on and on again, talking about medication, but I mean, you decide how you want to tackle those.
Okay, so let's tackle them. So the question about the testing, police testing versus the military testing, I'm assuming we're talking about the ASVAB test. I don't know who that question came from, but the written test. Okay, who is that? I'm sorry.
My name is Michael Burlow, and I'm
Hi, Michael.
in the military. So, and I had to take one. So I don't know if it's different.
Did you take a polygraph?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's different kinds of polygraphs. And there's different formats. There's all kinds. In the world of polygraph, there's a lot of different things. And so in the federal government, they take a two-part test, which is lifestyle and counterterrorism. So if you were going for a Secret Service job, they're going to ask you the lifestyle questions that we would all expect to be asked on a polygraph. Have you ever committed serious crimes? Have you ever been involved in illegal drugs? Have you lied on any of the information you filled out for on the applications? And then the anti-terrorism, which is a second part in the federal one that we don't do locally, would ask you questions like, have you ever been a part of a group that wanted to overthrow the government? Have you ever been offered money for national secrets? So theirs is a two-part federal one, whereas local police generally are just on the lifestyle. And that's not every police department. Not every police department utilizes the polygraph. Some do, some don't. And so in the military, yours, probably my guess, Michael, might have been more, was it terrorism focused versus lifestyle focused?
They kept just asking me questions about my life, and then because I was going for clearance, and it was a lot of random questions. I was like, honestly, I can't remember half of them.
Yes, and absolutely. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure I told you all was, when you walk into a polygraph, when you get there, this is a good time to go through the process. When you get there in the morning, the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to bring you into the polygraph room. And the first thing I'm going to tell you is have a seat in a normal chair, not the polygraph chair. Have a seat in a normal chair. And then I'm going to tell you, hey, we're going to be together today 3 to 4 hours, which is a typical time for a pre-employment polygraph. And 95% of that time, you're going to be sitting in that normal chair with me and you just talking like this. Only about 5% of the time will you be in the polygraph chair hooked up to the instrument. And during that time while you're not hooked up to the instrument, and the instrument part's at the very end, we're going to spend most of our time talking, doing an interview. You're going to fill out a questionnaire, and then we're just going to talk. And during that interview process is where I'm trying to figure out what things you've done, try to make you more comfortable. It's rare to talk to somebody that's taken a polygraph that hasn't stolen something in their lives. Because if somebody said, well, I've never stolen anything, what about pens from work or, accidental things like that? In your mind, if you view that as stealing, then that could come up on a polygraph. So we need to talk about all that stuff. And the way my questions are formed in a polygraph is, if you tell me about it before we take the polygraph and we discuss that issue, then I won't ask you about it on the polygraph. So my questions are phrased in such a way that if we talk about issues beforehand, we're not going to have to revisit those in the polygraph. So we try to address all that in a very long interview that we have before the polygraph, because my goal as a polygraph examiner is to get you past the polygraph, right? I want to make sure you pass it. And so the way we have to do that is we have to talk, make you feel more comfortable. I'm not so concerned that you stole a candy bar when you were 4. That's not really going to impact your ability to be a police officer to enforce the laws, right? And so our standards within Polygraph have changed a lot. So it's the interview before the polygraph that we try to make people a lot more comfortable, that we talk about the issues that are worrying them. And that's what I'll tell you. Hey, anything that's going on in your mind, anything that you're kind of worried about, we need to address that so that you can feel confident moving into the polygraph, that you can answer my questions and feel like you're telling me 100% the truth. So do we want to, some of the other questions, I don't know, what else did we have there? Michael, did I answer your question, by the way?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
In a very long-winded way, did I answer it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
We had a question about the about meeting the standards that are admissible in court. So why does law enforcement rely so heavily or rely on the polygraph results? And then there was also a question about medication affecting the heart rate.
Okay, so let's talk about the admissibility of polygraph. First of all, every state looks at polygraph differently. Virginia's, where I'm centered, is a state where polygraphs can be administered and admissible in court, but only if both sides agree to it before the polygraph. Now, that's a big ask, and that's why you don't see many polygraphs being admissible in court, because nobody wants to agree to that before they ever take one. Now, in some states like Indiana, the polygraphs are admissible in court. And, but I would tell you, relying solely on a polygraph is a mistake. A polygraph is a tool. It's a tool to help you get to somewhere else. So if somebody has reactions, we're going to do an interview. Afterwards, we're going to try to clear up that issue. Sometimes in a criminal, you'll get an admission. Sometimes in a pre-employment, if there's an issue, we'll do what we call a breakout test to try to clear up that issue. And sometimes you find out that people react because of incidents or things that happened to them that were really close to their heart that, they react to when you talk about. And so the admissibility of it, you don't see a lot, at least in the state of Virginia. And I can't really talk about West Virginia as much because I'm licensed in Virginia. So you don't see that a lot in criminal tests. Now, if people do approve it beforehand, both sides, and it can be used. And so I see Kevin's asked, do you get more information before? And I will tell you, generally, we get most of our information in the pre-employment interview that takes place before the polygraph. Because one of the things that we do is we give people a questionnaire and they go out and they fill it out. And it asks you questions like, have you ever stolen anything? Have you ever been involved in an assault? It asks a whole bunch of lifestyle questions to try to get stuff out. The reason we do this questionnaire in the long interview is what we don't want is we get started in a polygraph and you're constantly thinking about something that pops into your mind and you're like, oh, wait, I forgot to tell you about this. Then we have to stop the polygraph and start over. So we try to get all those issues done beforehand. And I just saw a question about, have you ever had somebody flunk a polygraph? Absolutely. Absolutely. Have people fail and make an admission afterwards about what they had done. I can think of one criminal polygraph that I ran involving a child sexual assault, and after the individual had strong reactions, and in the post-test interview, they admitted to the sexual assault. So you do have that happen. And, in terms of the investigation, that's great because we're able to clear it up. So what constitutes a failure is when we're scoring it, and that's what happens when we're looking at all these charts, and we run several different charts. A chart is one asking of all the question. We probably run 5 or 6 charts. And what we're looking for there is consistency. And so you score them. And so if I get a bigger reaction on one question than the other, there's a scoring mechanism. And so with each format you use, there's like a grading scale. And based on that grading scale is how you determine. In Virginia, we can only make 3 findings, either deception, no deception, or inconclusive. And so medicine can affect the polygraph, but on a general basis, it doesn't. If you're ever going to take a polygraph, you never stop taking or change medicines just because you're going to take it. If you're prescribed to take medication and it's the night before a polygraph, you take the medication. They can intertwine with it. Most of the times it's pretty easy to tell when somebody's on medicine, because we all have natural reactions and fluctuations in our physiology. And when you see somebody whose physiology is more kind of straight line, typically that can be caused by some type of drug that suppresses that physiology. So I know we had some other questions.
Yeah, there was a question. So, okay. Remember when you were speaking with Martha about the wavy water, right? The
Yes.
question was about the nervousness and how come that nervousness doesn't directly affect your system, because being nervous is something that you can't really control. So Maria wanted you, I think, to go in a little bit in depth a little bit about that whole idea about the lie being the rock, and just, you know, maybe explain that a little bit more.
Absolutely. So Melissa, your question, right?
Maria,
I'm sorry. Are you there? Can you hear me, Maria?
Yes, I can hear you.
So Maria, it's really a very interesting question that you asked. I guess really on my part, it's not correct to say 100% that nervousness never affects the exam, because it could. But what we're doing, we actually, even before you take the main exam where we're asking you questions, we have you take a practice exam. And during this practice exam, I have you lie to me on purpose. Quite frankly, because I want to see what it looks like when you lie. But also taking this practice exam, what it does, it gives us a good baseline for all your physiology. In other words, like a reference physiology. And so that would account for the nervousness. Does that,
okay.
Does that help
makes
kind
sense.
of explain?
Yeah, it does make sense. Yeah.
So that baseline gives us something to go off of, because in that test, you're lying to me on purpose, right? So I know what a lie looks like now for you. And so if I see reactions that are similar to that in the main exam, then it helps me to understand those readings a little bit better. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it absolutely does. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Were there any other questions I missed?
I think there are a couple questions about the score and the subjective nature of the score, and then also just back to medication. Wanting to know a little bit more about how medications impact that polygraph test.
Sure. So with medications, it's like people who are on certain cardiac medications, it will suppress the rate and the size of their readings. That's one thing. That's the medication that we run into the most, but by and large, most medications don't have an overall effect on it. It's certainly not the type of effect that would where we wouldn't have to run the test. Now, I will say this: when people are having a polygraph, we're purposely putting them under stress, right? I mean, it's a stressful thing. So one of the questions we ask also is the possibility of pregnancy. We do not test pregnant females for the purpose of, the last thing we want to do is put somebody in that condition under stress. So there are some rules. If people have serious heart issues, we won't do that kind of a test. So they have a really complicated health history. We typically will not run a polygraph, or we would have to their doctor would have to write us a note saying it's okay for them to have a polygraph. And so the types of medications that really affect the polygraph, obviously mostly cardiac medications with the cardiac. Breathing generally doesn't change too much, but sweat gland output can actually also be affected by some medications. Typically, things like muscle relaxers and things like that actually suppress the physiology. Hopefully I hit on the medicine part enough. And were there any others that I missed? Was it
There
subjective?
is one, Kevin. Kevin has a question about different types of ways to gather information. So do you think that you can find more information from a polygraph or analyzing a person's writing?
Okay, I'm going to talk to Kevin, and first I'm going to answer, is it Francine? It just went away on my screen. She had a question about pregnancy and people with health issues being automatically like omitted or not considered because they can't take a polygraph. Am I understanding that question right, Francine?
Yes, that's it.
That was by the way, an outstanding question. And so the answer to that question is no, they're absolutely not considered. We would just we would either not test them, or we would put them through the interview, but not the actual polygraph exam.
How is that fair to the folks that have to take the polygraph and then fail?
You know, but we could also reverse that question and say, how is it fair to them if they can't do it just because of their medical condition? So, you know, that's one of those questions that's very difficult. There was actually a case on it, excuse me, in Las Vegas, where a pregnant female was, what they did was they said, okay, we're gonna like suspend your hiring until you can complete the exam.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
And the courts ruled that you can't do that.
Interesting.
So, you know, it's a tough call on that. And, you know, when I do these talks, I always want to give people the most accurate information. And so if I'm going to err, I'm probably going to err on the side of safety.
Mm-hmm. So, but in the hiring process, I mean, if a pregnant woman or a person with a cardiac issue needs a job, how do you handle that? I mean, is it unfair not to consider them at the same time that the position is available?
Yes. So the courts, if I look by some court rulings, it would say it's absolutely unfair to not consider them. Mm-hmm. So we would either put them through just the interview portion without the actual polygraph, is probably normally what would happen.
Mm-hmm. And is there any penalty for them?
No,
like, do they have
absolutely
like a black mark because you can't verify their veracity?
No, there is no penalty.
Okay.
I mean, it's kind of like our criminal justice system. I always ask my students, which is worse, to put a innocent person in prison for a crime they didn't commit, or to leave a guilty person not in jail because we can't prove the case?
Mm-hmm.
How would you answer that one, Francine?
Well, I'm a criminal defense attorney, so does that give you a hint?
But, and you know what?
I don't want to see guilty people in prison.
Yeah, but I mean, I agree with you. And quite frankly, that's how our whole system is set up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think in the end, that's what.
A little bit, I mean, the standards and everything are a little bit different. I'm just thinking from an employment law standpoint.
Yes.
You know what
I mean? And I think most of the case law in that is not necessarily out of the Fourth Circuit.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
So we're kind of making an assumption.
I was just wondering how you guys did it, and
that's what we've done in the past.
Yeah. And have you ever hired somebody without having administered? Okay.
We absolutely have.
Good. That's encouraging. All right.
Yeah. I mean, we're certainly, I think it's a much more precarious position to not hire because of that than it is to hire absent one.
Right. But
because there are many organizations that hire people without law enforcement agencies hire without doing polygraphs. Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to make a mistake, I'm going to make it on the safer side, I think.
Got it. Thank you.
Hopefully that answered your question.
It did. Thank you.
Were you testing me on that? Do you know the answer, Francine? Was this just a, let's see if he really knows what he's talking about question?
Oh my golly, no. I'm just adding to the conversation.
God, thank you. That was a great question, actually. Because we've had that pop up, you know, where like you're halfway through the interview and somebody says, oh yeah, I'm pregnant. And I'm like, well, we got to stop the test. And they're like, no, I want to take it. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing it.
Well, you know, we had another presentation a couple of months back where we had someone who had a physical disability.
Yes.
Who really wanted to be in law enforcement. And, you know, felt precluded because of that particular situation. But otherwise could have been, you know, like a great detective. You maybe couldn't have done the physical training, but would have been great at other aspects of law enforcement. And I sort of was thinking about that situation when I brought this up. So no, it wasn't a test. I'm just wondering about folks who have, you know, maybe some really great characteristics that law enforcement would love, and some that might keep them from the job and shouldn't.
Well, I think that moving forward, and this off the topic a little bit about polygraph, but I think it's a great question, is that, you know, I think we have to reevaluate what is a police officer and who can be a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the past, maybe a conviction would keep people from being a police officer, but if somebody's convicted, I can tell you in Winchester, we've hired people who've been convicted of certain crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I don't think that speaks at all to the type of police officer that they're going to be 10, 15, 20 years after that incident.
Yes. Yes.
So, I mean, you know, in today's world, we need to think about it, right? I mean, before, you could never be a felon and be a police officer. And in many states, including Virginia, that's still the rule.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have to recognize that our laws have typically been in place for many years and don't reflect society today. Like in Virginia, we just changed our dollar amounts for felony and misdemeanor or petty larceny. I mean, think about it. If you steal somebody's backpack, you know, 20 years ago, what was the most valuable thing going to be in it? A calculator?
Yeah.
And today, if they have a cell phone in it, we're automatically at what, $700, $800?
Mm-hmm.
So automatically felony.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think we have to readdress in law enforcement what it is. And you know, and this is something we constantly battle with in hiring. What's something that's going to automatically disqualify somebody from being a police officer?
And also, if I could add, people change. You know,
Sure.
the whole idea of rehabilitation. I mean, if I did something, and I did many stupid things, luckily they weren't against the law, when I was 18 or 19 years old, I mean, do we hold that against a person for their whole lives?
And I think
No.
that in the past we have,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
but I don't think that's as true anymore,
One
because
time.
we can't apply that kind of logic anymore, because we don't have the same number of applicants we did 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and quite frankly, I can, you know, during my times hiring people that I thought were going to be great police officers turned out to be horrible. And some people that I didn't think were going to make it have turned out to be great.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
life.
Yeah. And, you know, there's a lot of issues that I hope we can address in these talks. For instance, you know, what is a typical police officer, gender, racially, socioeconomic, educational, all those levels.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm very proud in Winchester, nationwide, I think most departments average about 11% female officers, and in Winchester we're 20.
Wow.
You know, so I think that's an important step in readdressing how we're going to change our criminal justice system and make it open for everybody. Because we all know scientifically that the best departments are those that mirror the makeup of the communities they serve. And I'm pretty sure there's no communities made up of just males anymore. So, right. So we have to be able to reflect the community we're serving.
Right.
Agreed. Good point. Thank you.
Okay. So anyways, I hope I answered that question, Francine. And then were there any others I've missed?
So Sheila has been trying to introduce a series of questions in multiple different ways in the chat. And I think the questions really kind of revolve around this idea of social justice that Francine introduced in her question. And the focus is really on how do people with learning disabilities, people who may have been diagnosed with ADHD, or people who are taking medicine or medications like Adderall, what types of experiences do you know about for their polygraph tests, and how perhaps does that impact their possibilities of passing or failing, and so on and so forth?
So
thanks, Sheila.
And Sheila always asks great questions. So I think, it's important to realize that there are some things that can disqualify somebody from being a police officer. I mean, you have to be able to perform the duties of the job, but there's a lot of things that don't affect your ability to do the job, like ADHD. I think if we looked in the world, there's proof beyond belief that people with ADHD can do just about any job anybody else in the world can do. So that's not really an issue. And I think if you were to look in throughout the police departments in America, there's going to be officers that are serving and doing a fantastic job that are still, serving with mental illnesses. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't be a police officer. I think we need to get rid of the notion that police officers are somehow perfect people, because they're as flawed as any other group of people in the world. Now, when we talk about social justice, I think, we as universities and places of higher learning have an obligation and a responsibility to make inroads into social justice. We have been hiring, and there's, one of the things that we have to get better in our law enforcement agencies is hiring people of color. We none of us have a great track record of that. And so one of the issues that we've been dealing with is when we've been hiring Latino officers, is we hired an individual who had grown up without a lot of exposure to English, but was immersed in Spanish. And so courses like report writing and things like that are a way to overcome those obstacles so that those individuals can serve as police officers, and they're a valuable resource. We need them. And so sometimes we have to address and make our training of police officers more effective at dealing with some of the barriers that might in the past have kept people from being police officers. I don't know. That was my attempt to answer that question. Do you think I hit it?
I think
Dr. Howard Bostic, did I make it?
Yes, you're making it. I have one more question, and we kind of skipped over it a little bit, and it's Kevin's question about finding more information from a polygraph or analyzing a person's writing. So we don't have a lot of time left, but if we can just dance through that a little bit and then just say our lovely goodbyes for the evening after that would be super wonderful. Thank you.
Kevin, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So Kevin, I think in getting the information, so the pre-test interview is where we would get most of our information. And that's where people tend to be the most honest, because they're about to take a polygraph. So probably one of the things that happens the most with me is on their application and their background packet, people would indicate that I've never done drugs. And then we get right into the pre-test interview before the polygraph, and they'll say, okay, that's not actually the truth. I've used marijuana 5 times, 10 years ago. Well, so now the question that we have to address is not the drug use, right? Had they been honest about the drug use wouldn't have been an issue at all. The question is that they were not honest in the paperwork that they turned in. So should we hire somebody that didn't tell us the truth? What do you think, Kevin?
No, probably not. They probably wouldn't make a good police officer.
But then can't I make the argument, Kevin, that they're only lying because, it wasn't a lot of use, but they were just lying because they wanted to get hired. And they were afraid that if they told the truth, they wouldn't get hired. So it's not really a big deal, Kevin.
No, I think you need to have a level of transparency if you're going to work as a police officer, if you're going to go into law enforcement.
Okay, but that's the only issue we have with them Is that enough to not hire them?
It's a red flag for sure.
Okay. Francine, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
How would you address that as a defense attorney? You know, as somebody who knows the importance of truth in the law, if somebody lies to us on their initial application and then comes clean right before a polygraph, is that somebody we should hire, or is that a trust violation we shouldn't hire?
Well, that's a toughie.
It is.
Because if I had access to your personnel records, that would be great fodder for cross-examination, obviously.
Sure.
But from your standpoint, and what we were talking about before, I mean, is that little misconception representative of the person as a whole? I mean, everybody is afraid, you know, that some deep, dark secret from their past is going to catch up with them.
And I think that's
make you a bad person or inappropriate for a job.
And to be honest with you in Polygraph, that's the biggest barrier. The biggest barrier is people are afraid to be honest with us because they're afraid, embarrassed, ashamed of things they have done. And I tell people when they come in for the interview, Winchester's not looking to hire perfect people. No law enforcement agency in the world is looking to hire perfect people, because if they are, they won't have any employees.
Right.
What we're looking to hire are people who are honest about their mistakes.
Right.
And if you're honest with me about the mistakes, and oftentimes, you know, we can work around them. Now, if you've killed 5 people, that's probably going to be a disqualifier.
I
But
was just going to say, I mean, and then we get into like the slippery slope of honesty.
but what is it?
Quality of the dishonesty. You know, what's the level of dishonesty?
Yeah, and so I mean, that's the issue, is that they're all slippery slopes. Each individual, because we're flawed, we've made mistakes. And it's not easy or normal for us to talk about those mistakes when we're trying to get hired. Who goes into a job interview to talk about everything they've done wrong in their life?
Yeah.
So the way we do this is almost the exact opposite of way most organizations hire, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's going to call you in and go, so we'd like to start this interview by you telling us every mistake you've ever made. But that's kind of where we are.
Yeah.
And I recognize that, and it is difficult. So as an examiner, I have to be able to put people at ease enough to say, look, I'm not judging you from your mistakes, because I wouldn't want to be judged on mine. But I can tell you there's no perfect people in here. Everybody that works here has made mistakes. And so I already know you've made them because you're human.
But is there any sort of like pre-polygraph or pre-interview conversation with folks that inform them that, hey, you know what, we don't really care what you've done necessarily, but just don't lie to us?
Absolutely. So our polygraph, our process is they take the physical agility test. They do an interview where we tell them, look, the next step is a polygraph. Just be honest. We're not trying to hire perfect people. Before they ever fill out the questionnaire, I tell them, look, just tell me the truth. Do not lie, because we can deal with mistakes. What we can't deal with are trust issues.
Right.
Because this whole job is based, you know, the one thing you're going to do before you get on the stand and testify is you're going to say, I promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Mm-hmm. How are we supposed to start this relationship off on a lie?
Right. Understood. Yeah.
So we do give them fair warning multiple times.
That's good.
So hopefully, Kevin, did I address your question? Did that help a little bit?
Yeah, it helped a lot.
Really, most of our information doesn't come necessarily from writing. Handwriting analysis we don't do in the hiring process, but it would really just come in the pre-test interview, where most people feel more compelled to be totally honest.
Right. And I know like we're running low on time a little bit, but just when it comes to a criminal investigation, do you think a polygraph is still more would provide more information?
I think the polygraph is a tool, but is in no way what we should base the results of a criminal investigation on. In fact, I won't run them if the officers haven't done their fair share of interviewing.
Mm.
I mean, the polygraph is a tool. It's not the end all be all. It's not the answer. It's just one thing to do, but it should be done after we've done an investigation and after we've at least tried to talk to people. but it shouldn't, and should no way be what we base. In fact, I don't even think you're allowed to base charges based solely on that, because you can't, because it's still a scientific tool.
For sure. Okay.
All right,
Thank
so
you.
Craig, do you have any form of contact that you might want to put in the chat for anyone to ask you questions or to be mentored or whatever it is that they may be looking for?
Yeah. Do you want me to, here, I can get in the chat here, I think, and
Yes.
put my email address.
And while you do that, I'm going to thank you for being an absolutely phenomenal speaker and providing this information in so many different levels, right, of understanding about the polygraph exam. I want to tell all of the students and community members, thank you also for taking the time to listen and to become more aware. We can never know enough, right? We are going to have more of these events. We're going to have more applied lecture series, the partnerships between Blue Ridge and Shepherd, but Shepherd University also has a criminal justice lecture series where we bring in law enforcement and investigations and other types of really interesting social justice oriented organizations to speak with you about job opportunities and to have you ask questions and to learn and to meet people. It's not always what you know, it's who you know. So we're trying to make sure that you can meet many people and have mentors to ask questions to, but we're also trying to fill you with a plethora of information. So we're so proud and blessed and grateful to have this relationship with Blue Ridge. And we're so grateful also for having Craig Smith here to provide this amazing presentation. Please put your email addresses in the chat. I don't know how you found out about this event, if it was through a professor or on Facebook or through an email network or a friend or a community member, but please provide your email here if you'd like to know more about these events. We thank you, and you don't need to rush off, but you need to rush off.
And I will stay in the room. For anybody that wants to stick around, I'll stay in here if they have any more questions. But I just wanted to say thank you. What a great showing on our first talk. And thank everybody for taking the time to come in here. This is how we all get better. Dialogue. So thank you all.
Thank you, Chris.